The Salem sky was already dark by 5 o'clock, and snow had begun to dust the rooftops along Green Oak Lane like powdered sugar on a holiday pie. Edward Mallory sat in his favorite armchair, the leather worn soft from years of use, a coffee mug long since cold resting forgotten at his side. The house was quiet the way it often was since Margaret passed. No television, no music, just the creaking of old floorboards and the soft hum of the furnace kicking in every hour. Ed had just picked up the local paper when the shrill ring of the phone cut through the stillness. He blinked, startled, and reached for his reading glasses. The screen lit up with a name he didn't expect to see at this hour. Derek. His son never called on weeknights, especially not this late. Ed's heart beat a little faster as he picked up the receiver. Dad. Derek's voice cracked, not with age, but with something deeper desperation. I need your help. Urgently. Ed sat up straighter, the paper sliding from his lap. What's going on? Are you all right? Is Melissa okay? The kids. There was a pause filled with Derek's uneven breathing. Ed could hear pacing the rhythmic tap of shoes against tile flooring, probably the kitchen of their townhouse across town in South Salem. I lost money, Dad. A lot of it. Ed's fingers tightened around the receiver. How much? 50,000, Derek whispered. The silence that followed was heavy. Ed's mind struggled to process the number. 50,000. That was more than he'd earned in 2 years of pension checks. How, he finally asked. Derek exhaled like someone bracing for impact. Crypto. Some kind of digital investment. It looked promising, 30% return in 6 months. I thought I was being smart. I used the emergency fund, the kids' college savings, even took a home equity loan. You mortgaged the house. Ed's voice rose involuntarily. Not all of it, just 25 grand. But now the creditors are threatening to seize assets. They gave me until January 15th. Ed rubbed his temples. Across the street, the Parker family had turned on their Christmas lights. He used to admire those displays. Now they felt almost mocking. Have you talked to a lawyer, a financial counselor? I can't afford a lawyer, Derek snapped. I can barely afford groceries. Ed inhaled slowly. There has to be something we can do, and I've got some savings, Dad. Derek cut in sharp now. This isn't a few $100. This is real money, life-changing money. The words stung more than Ed expected. He'd worked 40 years as an engineer, saved carefully, lived modestly. To hear his life's effort dismissed as not real. I'm trying to help Derek, I know, but I need substantial help, not tip money. Outside, a car door slammed. A neighbor's dog barked, ordinary sounds of a neighborhood getting ready for bed. But inside Ed's home, the conversation had shifted. I'm listening, Ed said, though his stomach had started to churn. Derek hesitated again. There's one option. Ed's grip on the phone tightened. What kind of options? You've said it yourself. That house is too big for one person. 4 bedrooms, huge yard, constant upkeep. What are you suggesting? Ed's voice dropped to a low warning. The house is worth at least $300,000, maybe more, Derek continued. You could sell it, get a nice condo in one of those retirement communities with meal plans and activities. You'd have neighbors your age, less responsibility. And the rest, it could help all of us. It took a moment for the words to land. Ed felt like the air had been sucked from the room. You want me to sell the house? It would solve everything. Derek said quickly. No more maintenance, no more heating bills, just peace and comfort. No more, Margaret. Ed muttered, standing from his chair. Dad. This is where we raised you, Derek. Where your mother planted her roses. Where we spent every Christmas for 37 years. She's gone, Dad. And that house is a burden now. The words hit harder than any insult. Ed staggered slightly, gripping the back of the chair for support. You want me to erase her? No, Derek said, but his voice had gone cold. I want you to be practical. There was a long silence. The clock ticked on the mantel. Somewhere outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. You're being selfish, Derek said at last. That did it. You think I'm selfish, Ed said quietly. You who gambled away your family's future and now come to me like I'm your bank. My kids are going to be homeless, and whose fault is that? They're your grandchildren. Don't you dare use them like leverage. Derek's voice turned steely. If you won't help us, just say so. I won't sell this house, Derek. Then I hope your memories keep you warm when you're dying alone. The line went dead. Ed stood there, phone still pressed to his ear, listening to the buzz of the dial tone. His hand shook as he placed it back in the cradle. The silence that returned wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, brittle. He looked around the room, suddenly seeing it with new eyes. The faded photographs, the worn furniture, the dent in the floorboard from where Derek had dropped a toy truck 35 years ago. He walked to the kitchen on autopilot, poured himself a glass of water, and sat at the table. Margaret's chair was still pushed back at the angle she used to leave it. Her favorite mug still hung on the hook. Was he being selfish? Or was he finally protecting something worth keeping? He wasn't sure. And that uncertainty, more than Derek's cruelty, was what hurt most of all. The next morning, the sky over Salem was a blank sheet of gray. Snow still clung stubbornly to the sidewalks, but a wet drizzle had begun to melt the lighter patches. From the kitchen window, Ed Mallory watched a squirrel leap from a bare branch to the wooden fence in the backyard, the same fence he and Margaret had painted together 2 decades ago. He hadn't slept. Not really. Just a few hours of dozing in the recliner before his stiff neck woke him again. Derek's voice had echoed in his dreams, accusing sharp, "If you won't help us, just say so." Now everything felt heavier. Even the act of pouring a cup of coffee took longer, like the mug itself resisted being filled. The house was quiet, too quiet. He didn't turn on the radio, didn't check his phone. The silence wasn't peaceful this time. It pressed on his shoulders like an old winter coat that no longer fit. He sat at the small kitchen table, the one he and Margaret had eaten breakfast at every Sunday. His fingers traced the wood grain where the varnish had worn away. Her seat was still where it always was, opposite his cushions, slightly compressed from years of her presence. He looked over at the small cupboard to the left of the sink. Margaret's baking tins were still stacked there, flaky aluminum pans labeled with masking tape, apple pie, cornbread, pumpkin loaf. She had the neatest handwriting, even when arthritis crept into her knuckles. Ed stood slowly and walked to the living room where a built-in bookcase held their photo albums. He pulled one down, dust coating his fingers. He returned to the kitchen and opened it, the spine creaking like an old friend stretching after a nap. There she was, Margaret at 25, holding newborn Derek. Her dark hair curled her smile wide despite the exhaustion in her eyes. Another page, Derek at 6, grinning with a missing front tooth beside a snowman. Then at 10, then at 16, each picture showing more of Margaret's handiwork in the background, hand-sewn curtains, perfectly folded laundry, home-baked birthday cakes. Ed swallowed hard. The room blurred slightly. He hadn't told Derek this, but the will was already written. The house would have gone to him eventually, along with the modest savings account. It was all going to him until now. A knock at the back door broke the spell. Ed wiped his eyes and stood. Through the frosted glass, he saw a familiar shape, sturdy frame, plaid jacket, knit beanie pulled low. He opened the door. Carl. "Morning," Ed said. Carl Thompson, his neighbor and friend of nearly 30 years. His cheeks were red from the cold, and he held a small paper bag in one hand. "Brought you some apple fritters." Gloria baked a fresh batch. Ed smiled weakly. "Tell her I said thanks." "You look like hell," Carl said, stepping inside and stomping snow from his boots. "Mind if I sit?" Ed gestured toward the table. "Help yourself." Carl took a seat, glancing at the open photo album. He didn't say anything for a moment, just reached into the bag and pulled out a fritter, sliding one toward Ed. "Rough night." Ed nodded. Derek called. Carl raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess he didn't win the lottery. He wants me to sell the house." Carl exhaled sharply through his nose. "Ah, said it's too big, that I should downsize, move into some retirement condo and let go of the past, and that's his business because he's in debt. Crypto. Big time." Carl leaned back in his chair, lips pressed in a firm line. "So he screws up, and now it's your job to clean up the mess." Ed didn't respond. Carl tilted his head. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" "I don't know. He's my son. And the kids, they don't deserve this. They don't." Carl agreed. "But selling this place, that's not helping. That's enabling." Ed looked down at his hands. "I just keep wondering if I failed him somewhere along the way. Maybe I gave too much, or not enough. I thought I raised him better." Carl reached across the table and patted his hand. "You did your job, Ed. He's 42. At some point, a man's choices are his own." Ed was quiet for a long time. "I look around this place," he said finally, "and I see her everywhere. Margaret, this house is her. Every curtain, every cabinet, every patch in the garden. It feels like if I sell, she disappears." Carl nodded slowly. "You're not crazy for feeling that way." "I opened my will last night," Ed added. "He's already getting the house when I die. But now it's like he doesn't want to wait." Carl's eyes darkened. That's not about need, Ed. That's entitlement, and it's ugly. The two men sat in silence for a moment, the kind of silence old friends shared when words were both too much and not enough. Then Ed's landline rang. They both looked at it. Ed's side stood and picked up the receiver. The caller ID glowed, Derek Mallory. He hesitated. Carl said softly, "You don't have to answer." Ed brought the phone to his ear. "Hello, Dad." Derek's voice was calm, too calm. "I've been thinking. About last night. And I want to apologize." Ed said nothing. "I was out of line. I was scared. And I lashed out. I'm sorry. Still." Ed said nothing. "I'd like to make it up to you," Derek continued. "Melissa's cooking Christmas Eve dinner. The kids would love to see you. I would too. Please come." Ed closed his eyes. His voice came out thin. "Let me think about it." "Sure. Of course. Just let me know, all right, Ed?" Hung up gently. Carl raised an eyebrow. "Well, he invited me to dinner." "Huh, he sounded different. Desperate can sound a lot like sincerity if you're not careful." Ed looked at the photo album again. Margaret smiled back from 1985, holding a pie in both hands, the old oak tree visible through the window behind her. "I don't want to go," Ed whispered, "but I miss the kids." Carl stood, placing a hand on Ed's shoulder. "Then go for them, but keep your eyes open." Ed nodded. Outside, the drizzle had stopped. The clouds were beginning to lift, and a pale sliver of sunlight stretched across the snowy yard. 2 days before Christmas, the streets of Salem buzzed with a kind of quiet, sleepy cheer. Lights blinked gently and windows wreaths adorned nearly every door, and even the grocery clerks wore Santa hats. At the heart of it all, Ed Mallory stood in the middle of Becker's Toy and Hobby with a puzzled look on his face. He held a Lego kit in one hand and a craft set in the other. Chloe was 9, creative, thoughtful. Ethan was 7, curious and wild. He hadn't bought toys in years. He used to know exactly what would light up Derek's eyes: model trains, puzzles, science kits. Now he could barely guess what his grandkids would be into. A teenage store clerk passed and offered him a sympathetic smile. "Need help finding something?" "No, thank you," Ed replied, adding both kits to his basket. As he walked toward the register, he spotted a small book with glittery letters, the Grandpa book. He picked it up, flipped through a few pages, and added it on impulse. Outside, the wind had picked up again, swirling a few flakes of snow. Ed zipped up his coat and headed to his car. His breath puffed in little clouds as he loaded the gifts into the back seat. He paused, taking in the sight of the downtown square, bundled-up couples holding hands, families laughing near the giant lit-up tree. It was almost comforting, almost. At home, the smell of cinnamon filled the kitchen as Ed pulled a pie from the oven, Margaret's recipe, the only one he'd mastered. He wasn't much of a cook, but that apple pie was sacred. It reminded him of every Christmas they'd ever shared. He set the pie on the cooling rack, then wiped his hands on a dish towel. The house felt a little warmer today. Maybe it was the oven, or maybe it was the memory of Derek's apology still lingering in his chest. Carl dropped by just after 4, wearing his usual flannel and holding a 6-pack of root beer. "You baking?" Carl sniffed the air as he stepped inside. "Smells better than Gloria's kitchen. Don't let her hear me say that. Margaret's apple pie," Ed said, waving him in. "Thought I'd bring something for Christmas dinner." Carl raised an eyebrow. "So you're going?" Ed hesitated, then nodded. "I think so." Carl set the bottles on the counter. "You trust him?" "I trust that Chloe and Ethan want their grandfather there." "That's enough." Carl crossed his arms. "And Derek, you think his apology was real?" Ed didn't answer immediately. He looked out the window where his backyard trees stood, bare branches reaching like arms toward the gray sky. "I think—" He sounded like a boy who realized he crossed a line, Ed said quietly. "Maybe for the first time." Carl sighed. "I hope you're right. But if something feels off, anything, you call me. Or walk out. No hesitation." Ed gave a half smile. "You think he's setting me up?" "I think he's desperate," Carl replied. "And desperate people don't always think straight. Sometimes they think crooked." That night, Ed wrapped the presents at the dining table, careful to fold each corner neatly, even if the paper was too shiny and the tape too stubborn. He found an old roll of Margaret's ribbon burgundy with gold edges and tied each gift with slow, deliberate care. He imagined Chloe's face lighting up, Ethan's excited little jumps. the sound of laughter echoing through Derek's house the way it used to in this one. And he hoped quietly and fiercely that this dinner would be what it claimed to be a peace offering, a beginning. Christmas Eve arrived with fresh snow. Not much, but enough to blanket the lawns and dust the roads in white. Ed dressed slowly, choosing his best sweater red with a simple cable-knit design and a pair of pressed slacks. He stared at himself in the mirror for a long time. Margaret's photograph sat on the dresser. She wore her holiday brooch, a gold snowflake pinned to her green cardigan. "You'd want me to try," he whispered. He placed her brooch on his own sweater just below the collar. Downstairs, he loaded the pie into a carrier, tucked the gifts into a large cloth bag, and double-checked that the house was locked. As he stood on the porch looking out over Green Oak Lane, his breath caught in his throat. The world was quiet. Still, for a moment everything felt just like it had years ago. Then he stepped into his car and turned the key. The drive across town was uneventful. Salem's neighborhoods were sleepy traffic light. By the time he pulled into Derek's cul-de-sac, the sun was starting to dip low, casting a soft orange glow over the snow-covered homes. Derek's house was lit up tastefully, not extravagantly. A small Christmas tree sparkled in the window. Ed parked along the curb, turned off the engine, and sat in silence for a moment. His hands rested on the steering wheel. Was he walking into a trap? No, that was paranoia. But still, he grabbed the pie, the bag of gifts, and walked slowly toward the front door. Before he could knock, it swung open. Dad Derek smiled arms wide. "Glad you made it. The kids are gonna freak." Ed smiled politely, stepping inside. The warmth hit him immediately, heat and cinnamon and pine. "Smells good," Ed said. "That's all, Melissa." Derek chuckled. "She's in the kitchen." From the hallway, two small bodies came barreling in. "Grandpa." Chloe squealed, launching into his arms. "You came." Ethan followed, clinging to his leg like a monkey. "I missed you both," Ed said, holding them tightly. Melissa appeared in the doorway, apron dusted with flour. "Hi, Ed. It's good to see you." "You too," he said. Her voice was soft, tired, but kind. They sat for dinner at 6. The table was laid out beautifully: ham, mashed potatoes, green beans, crescent rolls, cranberry sauce. The kids chattered happily. Derek poured wine. Melissa lit candles. Ed found himself smiling more than he expected. For a while, it felt like a real Christmas. But as the meal went on, something began to shift. Derek's questions became oddly specific about Ed's banking habits, about whether the house needed repairs, about if he'd considered downsizing eventually, just for safety. Ed answered vaguely, redirecting when he could. Melissa seemed nervous, darting glances between them. When the meal was done and the dishes cleared, Ed offered to help in the kitchen. Alone for a moment, he looked around. The kitchen was spotless, but there on the counter behind a stack of cookbooks was a small, unfamiliar bottle. No label, just a plain glass vial. He frowned. A cold chill settled over him. Melissa walked in and froze when she saw where he was looking. "Where'd this come from?" Ed asked gently. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Behind them, Derek called out, "Coffee, Dad," or maybe something stronger. Ed looked at Melissa. She looked down. The pie sat cooling on the windowsill. His hands were suddenly clammy. He forced a smile. Coffee sounds good, but his mind was racing. The living room buzzed with the easy hum of holiday contentment, wrapping paper scattered like confetti. Chloe curled up with her new sketch pad, Ethan building a Lego spaceship on the rug. Soft carols played from a speaker in the corner, and the scent of coffee mixed with pine and cinnamon in the warm air. Ed sat on the couch, a mug in hand, smiling faintly as he watched his grandkids. The pie had been a hit. Melissa even said it tasted just like Margaret's. Derek had been attentive too, refilling drinks, cracking jokes, even offering to help clean. It was almost too perfect, and that's what made Ed uneasy. The words Carl had spoken 2 nights ago lingered. Desperation doesn't always look desperate. Ed took a slow sip of coffee. It tasted slightly bitter. He blamed the beans. Derek returned from the kitchen with a plate of cookies. "Saved you the last gingerbread man," he said, handing it over. Ed chuckled. "How generous." Derek sat beside him. "Listen, Dad, I just wanted to say again, I appreciate you being here. It really means a lot." Ed nodded. "I'm glad I came. The kids, they're growing fast." Derek's expression softened, then shifted barely. "You ever think about making changes? I mean, being closer to them? Maybe moving out of that big house?" Ed gave a thin smile. "We've had this conversation. I'm not trying to push," Derek said quickly. "Just thinking long term. You deserve to relax, not worry about gutters and lawn work. Ed took another sip of coffee, slower this time. "You're not wrong," he said carefully, "but I'm still thinking." Derek nodded, then stood. "Want a refill?" "I'm okay," Ed replied. His stomach was starting to flutter, not in nerves, but something else, a faint tightness. He set the mug down. The kids were still playing, but their voices were starting to echo in Ed's ears. The lights on the tree shimmered too brightly. His fingers twitched slightly, then stiffened. His breathing grew shallow. He tried to stand, but his knees buckled. Melissa noticed first. "Ed, are you all right?" His voice came out wrong, garbled. His throat tightened. "Water!" Melissa rushed to him. "Derek, something's wrong. Call an ambulance." Ed gripped the edge of the armchair, forcing himself upright. The room tilted, but he pushed toward the kitchen. He needed air. He needed to think. The vial. His hand slammed against the counter as he stumbled forward, knocking over a tin of sugar. He gripped the edge of the counter, gasping. There, on the side shelf, half hidden behind a stack of napkins, was the small glass vial he'd seen earlier. Still unlabeled, still out of place. He grabbed a dish towel, wrapped it around the vial, and slid it into his coat pocket. Behind him, Derek's voice rang out, calm and controlled. "Dad, you okay? Maybe you just need to lie down." "No," Ed croaked. He reached for his phone. His fingers felt thick, numb, but he managed to press 911. The call connected. 911, what's your emergency? Ed forced each word. "Poisoned, I think. My son." The operator's voice sharpened. "Sir, are you safe? Are you able to stay on the line? I'm at 122 Green Hollow Drive. I need help." A loud noise behind him, a cabinet slamming. Derek appeared in the doorway. His face had changed. The warmth was gone. Just a hard stare. "You weren't supposed to feel it this fast," he muttered. Ed's heart stuttered. "You really couldn't just let go, could you?" Derek said. "Just give me the damn house." Ed backed away, one hand still gripping the phone. From the hallway, Melissa shouted, "The ambulance is coming!" Derek turned sharply, the mask slipping back on. "I've got it under control, honey. Dad's just lightheaded." Ed stared at him, the monster behind the charm. Sirens wailed in the distance, faint but growing. Derek leaned in, voice low. "You made this harder than it had to be." Ed didn't answer. He clutched the towel-wrapped vial tighter. Outside, red and blue lights flickered against the window. The cavalry had arrived. Minutes later, 2 officers stepped through the front door, followed by paramedics. Melissa rushed forward. He collapsed. He said he was poisoned. Ed pointed at Derek, still barely able to speak. "He tried." Derek raised his hands. Whoa, hold on. My dad's confused. He's elderly. He's had some..." The lead officer, a woman named Martinez, stepped forward. "Sir, we'll need you to step aside." Ed pulled the vial from his coat. "This, check it." Martinez took it with gloved hands, passed it to her partner. One paramedic helped Ed onto a stretcher, checking his vitals. "I'm okay," Ed whispered. "Just weak." Derek paced behind them. "This is crazy. You think I, tried to kill my own father? That's insane." Melissa stood frozen in the hallway, hand over her mouth. Chloe peeked around the corner. "Mommy? What's going on?" Melissa stepped forward, her voice trembling. "He said he didn't feel well after the coffee. He found that bottle." The room froze. Derek's face twisted. "Melissa, what are you saying?" She looked at him and said nothing. Officer Martinez looked at her partner. "Cuff him, what?" "No." Derek backed away. "You can't. This is a mistake. You have the right to remain silent," the officer began. As they led Derek out the door, he turned back one last time. "You destroyed this family, old man." Ed, still on the stretcher, met his eyes. "No," he said quietly. "You did." The living room lights still glowed softly, but the warmth they once offered had fled. In their place, chaos. Uniformed officers paced through Derek's house, radios crackling. A pair of paramedics hovered near the stretcher where Ed Mallory sat, pale but conscious. The children had been taken upstairs, kept away from the flashing lights and raised voices. Outside, the front yard had transformed into a scene from a crime drama patrol. Cars parked diagonally, neighbors peering through blinds, one even filming discreetly from behind a curtain. Ed watched it all through tired eyes. His hands still trembled slightly, not just from the lingering effects of whatever had been in the coffee, but from the gravity of what had just happened. His own son, his own flesh and blood, had tried to poison him. Melissa sat nearby on the edge of the couch, wrapped in a gray throw blanket, her face pale and hollow. She hadn't said much since Derek had been led away in handcuffs. Her silence was a storm, quiet but electric. Officer Martinez knelt beside Ed. "How are you feeling, Mr. Mallory?" "I've had better Christmas Eves," he replied dryly. Martinez managed a small smile. "We've taken the substance from the vial to the lab. The paramedics said your vitals are stable, but we'd still recommend getting checked out at the hospital tonight." "I will," Ed said. "Soon as I know the kids are okay. They're upstairs with the social worker. Chloe's drawing. Ethan's asking a lot of questions." Ed nodded. "That sounds like them." Martinez hesitated, then said, "We're going to need your statement tonight. But first, can I ask you something?" "Of course. When you saw that bottle, why didn't you just leave?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then, "Because I had to know. I needed the truth." She nodded slowly. "I think you just saved your own life," she said. Meanwhile, in the foyer, Derek sat in the back of a squad car, wrists cuffed, his jaw tight. His face had gone from panic to fury to something else entirely, cold resignation. Inside, Melissa finally spoke. "I knew something was wrong," she whispered. Ed turned to her. "What do you mean he's been different?" "For months, short-tempered, always talking about money, obsessing over that stupid crypto market." "Did he ever talk to you about the house?" She nodded. "Last week he said if something happened to you natural, I thought we'd be okay. He said you'd taken care of us." She paused. "I thought he meant your will." Ed looked down. "He did." Melissa covered her face with her hands. "I didn't want to believe it. But tonight when you looked at me, I knew." He reached out gently, took her hand. "You did the right thing. I should have done it sooner." By the time the officers finished collecting statements and the children were asleep, it was nearly midnight. The house was quiet again, but not in a peaceful way. A hollow quiet, like an echo chamber where something sacred had been broken. A paramedic helped Ed to his feet. "You sure you're okay to walk?" the young man asked. "Been walking longer than you've been alive," son Ed muttered. "I'll manage." They stepped out into the night, cold and sharp, the wind carrying the scent of pine and sirens. Ed looked around one last time at the house, once a home, now a crime scene. He turned to Officer Martinez. "Will he get time for this? If the lab confirms it's poison," she said, "he'll be facing attempted murder charges, minimum 15 years. Ed exhaled long and slow. "He's not just my son. He's their father." Martinez looked at him. "That's why it's so important that you survived." The hospital was quiet, as most places are in the hours after midnight on Christmas. Ed lay in a small room, IV and his arm heart monitor beeping softly. His test results were promising. The dose had been small, likely meant to mimic a stroke or heart attack. Quick, undetectable, but not tonight. Tonight the truth had been louder than Derek's plans. A soft knock came at the door. Melissa peeked in. "They said I could visit." He sat up slightly. "You didn't have to come." "Yes, I did." She walked in holding a small tin. "Chloe made you something. Said she wants to bake with you next time." He opened it, a small gingerbread cookie shaped vaguely like a man covered in pink frosting. He smiled. "Do the kids know only that Daddy's gone away for a while? I'll tell them more when I figure out how." Ed nodded. "I'm here. However you need." Melissa's eyes welled up. "I'm so sorry." "You didn't do this," Ed said gently. She looked down. "I let it happen. You stopped it when it mattered." He reached out and she took his hand. Later that night, alone again, Ed stared at the ceiling. He thought of Margaret, what she'd say, what she'd feel. Heartbroken, no doubt. But maybe proud, too. Because when it came down to it, he hadn't curled up and faded away. He'd stood up. He'd survived. Not out of vengeance, but out of love. For the children, for the memories, for the life that still had meaning. And in that quiet, sterile hospital room, Ed whispered something no one else would hear. "Merry Christmas, Margaret." 2 months later, Salem thawed. The last patches of snow melted into the soil and small green buds began to peek through the ground like shy promises. The sky, still mostly gray, had lost its winter bite. For the first time in a while, Ed Mallory opened his windows not for necessity but for air. For life. The old house on Green Oak Lane creaked in familiar ways, but it didn't feel so heavy anymore. It felt honest. Every scuff on the floor, every faded picture frame, every dusty book was still exactly where it belonged. But now they felt like witnesses, not burdens. In the kitchen, sunlight spilled across the countertop. A kettle whistled softly. Ed moved slowly, carefully pouring hot water into his mug. A new blend, Earl Grey with a hint of lavender. Margaret would have loved it. The doorbell rang. He opened it to see two smiling faces, Chloe and Ethan, bundled in light jackets, backpacks bouncing. "Hi, Grandpa," they chimed in unison. Behind them, Melissa stood with a tote bag of snacks and books. "Weekend drop-off," she said with a sheepish grin. Ed stepped aside. "Come on in. I just baked banana bread." "Is it your kind or Grandma's kind?" Ethan asked suspiciously. Ed raised an eyebrow. "Grandma's. The only kind worth baking." They ran past him, laughter filling the house like music. Melissa lingered in the doorway. "They've been looking forward to this all week. Chloe made you something again." Ed smiled. "She's got a streak of her grandma in her." Melissa's face turned soft. "Thank you for everything." He nodded quietly, accepting the weight of her words. Later that afternoon, Ed and the kids sat at the kitchen table, glue sticks and glitter spread across newspapers. Chloe was making a homemade "Spring is Coming" banner for the hallway. Ethan had taken to sticking googly eyes on every surface. The house had never looked less tidy. It had also never felt more alive. Carl stopped by around 4, bringing garden gloves and a bag of seed packets. "You ready to bring that backyard back from the dead?" he asked, holding up a packet of marigolds. "Only if you're doing the digging," Ed quipped. They stood in the backyard together, surveying the frozen beds, planning where to plant. Ed pointed to the spot beneath the kitchen window. "That's where Margaret used to grow her tulips," he said. Carl gave a nod. "Let's bring them back." That night, after the kids had gone to bed and the house had quieted, Ed sat in the living room, a mug of tea in one hand, Chloe's latest drawing in the other. It showed a house not perfectly drawn but warm, smoke curling from the chimney. A man with glasses and a red sweater stood in the doorway, arms wide open. Two small stick figures ran toward him, smiling. At the bottom, in careful handwriting, "Grandpa's house equals love." Ed chuckled, then sighed, a deep, contented sigh. Melissa joined him the next morning for coffee. They sat in silence for a while, watching the kids play in the yard. She glanced over. "Any regrets?" He looked out at the old oak tree, its branches still bare but ready to bloom. "Not one," he said. She smiled. "You ever think about moving?" "Somewhere smaller." Chuckled. "This house has good bones and better stories." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I changed the will," he added quietly. "The house goes to the kids now. In trust, no loopholes, no shortcuts." Melissa reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you, truly." Ed took a sip of tea, the steam curling upward like the branches outside. Spring was coming, not just outside but inside too.